Before Rome became the master of the ancient world, it had a rival, a shadow looming to the south. In the north, a young republic, hungry, disciplined, and ruthlessly ambitious. Across the sea, the great city of Carthage, a mercantile empire, master of the waves, whose wealth and influence stretched across the Mediterranean. Two titans, one sea. Their collision was inevitable, and it would ignite a struggle for dominance that would span over a century. A war that would decide who would rule the known world, and who would be utterly erased from history. These were the Punic Wars. The first spark flew in 264 BC. The prize? Sicily, a jewel of an island, rich and fertile, perfectly positioned at the heart of the Mediterranean. It was too valuable for either power to concede. Carthage, with its legendary navy, felt secure. Rome, a land-based power, had no fleet to speak of. But the Romans were masters of adaptation. They refused to be outmatched. In an incredible feat of engineering and sheer willpower, they built an entire navy from scratch, and they added a secret weapon, the corvus, a massive boarding bridge with a heavy spike. Suddenly, sea battles became land battles. Roman legions swarmed Carthaginian decks, turning naval combat into the brutal, close-quarters fighting they excelled at. For more than 2 decades, the conflict raged across land and sea, a relentless war of attrition. Finally, in 241 BC, Carthage faltered. Rome seized not only Sicily, but also Sardinia and Corsica. The Republic had taken its first momentous step beyond the Italian peninsula. The seeds of empire had been sown, but this was only the beginning. Carthage was defeated, but not broken, and in its heart, a fire of vengeance was being kindled. In 218 BC, a new general emerged, a name that would haunt Roman nightmares for generations, Hannibal Barca. As a boy, he had sworn an oath upon an altar, an oath of eternal hatred for Rome. Now he was ready to make good on that promise. Rejecting the obvious sea route to Italy, Hannibal chose the impossible. He would march. He led his vast army, complete with his famous war elephants, across the treacherous rivers of Gaul, through hostile territory. And then, in one of history's most audacious military feats, over the frozen, deathly peaks of the Alps. The journey was catastrophic. He lost nearly half of his men and most of his elephants to the cold, starvation, and ambushes. Yet, he emerged on the other side, descending into Italy like an avenging spectre, scarred, weakened, but burning with a singular purpose. What followed was Rome's darkest hour. Hannibal was a military genius unlike any they had ever faced. At the Trebia River, he lured the Romans into an icy trap. At Lake Trasimene, he ambushed and annihilated an entire consular army. And then came Cannae in 216 BC. It was a masterclass in tactical encirclement and a catastrophe for Rome. On that single, horrific day, as many as 50,000 Roman soldiers were killed. The losses were so staggering that senators were said to have wept in the Forum. Panic gripped the city. For the first time, Rome stood on the very brink of collapse. Its allies began to waver, and the Republic's future hung by a thread. Yet Rome did not break. It endured. Realizing they could not defeat Hannibal in a pitched battle, they adopted a new, frustrating strategy. They would avoid him. Led by Fabius Maximus, later nicknamed the Delayer, Roman armies shadowed Hannibal, harassing his supply lines and wearing down his forces, but refusing to engage him directly. While Hannibal was trapped in a war of attrition in Italy, Rome took the fight elsewhere. In Spain, a brilliant young general, Publius Cornelius Scipio, began systematically dismantling Carthage's empire, capturing its strongholds, and cutting off Hannibal's support. Then, Scipio did the unthinkable. He proposed taking the war directly to Africa, to the very gates of Carthage. The Senate, desperate, agreed. The gamble worked. Hannibal, undefeated in Italy for 15 years, was finally recalled to defend his home. And so, the stage was set for one of the most anticipated showdowns in all of military history. In 202 BC, on the plains of Zama, the two greatest generals of the age finally met face to face. Hannibal versus Scipio. Elephant charge met Roman discipline. Carthaginian veterans clashed with Scipio's legions. But this time, Hannibal's genius met its match. Scipio had studied his rival's tactics, and he turned them against him. Rome was victorious. The Second Punic War was over. Carthage was humbled, stripped of its empire, its navy dismantled, and forced to pay a crippling tribute. Rome had faced its greatest fear, stared into the abyss, and emerged triumphant. For 50 years, an uneasy peace held. Carthage, though politically neutered, began to prosper once more through trade. Its port bustled, and its wealth grew. And in Rome, this recovery sparked not admiration, but a deep-seated paranoia. The fear of a resurgent Carthage, the specter of another Hannibal, haunted the Senate. One man, in particular, became the voice of this fear: Cato the Elder. A staunch, unyielding conservative, he ended every single speech he gave in the Senate, no matter the topic, whether it was about aqueducts or taxes, with the same chilling refrain: Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. Over and over, he hammered the message home. Eventually, Rome listened. In 149 BC, the legions marched for a third and final time. This was not a war for territory or for influence. It was a war of extermination. The Senate's orders were absolute. Carthage was to be wiped from the face of the earth. The city, knowing its fate, resolved to fight to the last. For 3 years, they endured a brutal siege. It was a desperate, total defense. They melted down statues for metal, turned jewelry into weapons. The women of Carthage cut off their long hair to be woven into ropes for catapults. Every man, woman, and child capable of fighting joined the defense. This was not a battle for victory. It was a primal struggle for survival. In 146 BC, the final Roman assault broke through the walls. What followed was a week of unspeakable horror. The legionaries fought house to house, street by street, in a city that had become a death trap. The fighting was so intense that the Romans had to clear paths through the dead to advance. Temples were sacked, homes were burned, and the last defenders, fighting from the citadel, were finally overwhelmed. Of a population that once numbered in the hundreds of thousands, only about 50,000 starving survivors remained to be sold into slavery. After the city was looted, it was systematically leveled. Ancient sources claim the fires set by the Romans burned for over 2 weeks, until nothing was left but smoldering ruins. To ensure it would never rise again, they say the ground was sown with salt. Carthage had not just been defeated, it had been annihilated. The Punic Wars, a century-long epic of ambition, genius, and destruction, were finally over. They had reshaped the ancient world. From the ashes of its greatest rival, Rome rose, now the undisputed superpower of the Mediterranean. The path to empire was clear, its destiny rewritten in the blood and fire that consumed Carthage. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey into one of history's most pivotal conflicts. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and hitting that follow button for more deep dives into the past. We'll see you in the next one.